Iran's response didn't come out of anger alone. It reflects careful planning, timing, and long-term military thinking. Instead of rushing into an immediate retaliation, Iranian leadership appears to have taken time to assess the situation, analyze the impact of earlier strikes, and then choose targets that would send the strongest possible message. This kind of approach shows discipline and intent, where every move is designed to achieve a specific objective rather than just showing force. What makes this even more significant is how the response was structured. Rather than random or scattered actions, the strikes and warnings seem coordinated in a way that maximizes psychological and strategic pressure. The goal is not just to respond, but to shift the balance, to remind both the United States and Israel that Iran still has the capability to influence the region in a serious way. This includes demonstrating reach, precision, and readiness without immediately triggering an all-out war. Another important aspect is the signaling behind these actions. In geopolitical conflicts, every move carries a message. Iran's response appears to be aimed at multiple audiences at the same time: its own population, regional allies, and global powers. Domestically, it shows strength and control. Internationally, it communicates that Iran is not backing down and is willing to escalate if necessary, but on its own terms. There's also a level of calculated restraint involved. Even in escalation, there are limits being observed, suggesting that the intention is to apply pressure without crossing certain red lines too quickly. This balance between aggression and control is often what defines strategic behavior in high-stakes conflicts like this, where one misstep could trigger a much larger chain reaction. The targeting of high-level figures has introduced a completely different dimension to the conflict, shifting it from conventional military exchanges to a far more sensitive and dangerous phase. When individuals in top leadership positions are taken out, it's not just about immediate tactical advantage. It directly impacts decision-making structures, chain of command, and overall strategic coordination within the country. These are the people responsible for planning operations, managing intelligence, and shaping national security responses, so their removal creates both disruption and urgency. What makes this development even more critical is the precision involved. These were not broad attacks aimed at military bases or infrastructure. They were highly focused operations that required detailed intelligence, surveillance, and timing. This suggests a deep level of infiltration or advanced monitoring capabilities, which adds psychological pressure on the targeted side. It sends a message that no position is completely secure, even at the highest levels of power. At the same time, such actions tend to provoke a much stronger reaction compared to standard military strikes. Losing key leadership figures is often viewed as crossing a line because it directly challenges the authority and stability of a nation. This increases the likelihood of retaliation, not just in scale, but also in intensity, as the affected side feels compelled to restore deterrence and demonstrate that such losses will not go unanswered. There's also an internal impact that often goes unnoticed. Within the system, sudden gaps in leadership can create confusion, force rapid replacements, and sometimes lead to shifts in strategy. New leaders may adopt more aggressive or more cautious approaches, depending on the situation, which can further influence how the conflict evolves. This constant adjustment adds unpredictability, making it harder for both sides to anticipate each other's next move. In conflicts like this, once leadership becomes a target, the stakes rise significantly. It moves beyond territory or influence and starts affecting the core structure of power itself, which is why such developments are often seen as a major escalation point rather than just another step in an ongoing conflict. The moment energy infrastructure becomes part of the battlefield, the entire situation shifts from a regional conflict to something with global economic consequences. Facilities like major gas fields, oil terminals, and refineries are not just national assets. They are deeply connected to international supply chains that power industries, transportation, and daily life across multiple continents. When these sites are targeted, even the threat alone can disrupt markets, trigger price spikes, and create uncertainty far beyond the immediate conflict zone. What makes this particularly serious is the strategic value of these locations. Energy infrastructure is often heavily protected and carefully managed because of its importance to a country's economy and stability. Striking or even threatening such targets sends a powerful message that the conflict is no longer limited to military objectives. It signals a willingness to apply pressure where it hurts the most economically, both for the country involved and for global partners who rely on that supply. There's also a ripple effect that starts almost instantly. Investors react, markets fluctuate, and governments begin reassessing their energy security. Even a temporary disruption can lead to increased oil and gas prices, affecting everything from fuel costs to food supply chains. Countries that depend heavily on imports may start looking for alternative sources, while exporters may adjust their strategies in response to shifting demand and risk. Another critical factor is the vulnerability of key routes like shipping lanes and choke points. If tensions continue to rise, areas such as the Strait of Hormuz become focal points of concern, as a significant portion of the world's oil passes through these narrow corridors. Any threat to these routes can amplify the situation, creating fear of shortages and forcing military presence to increase in order to secure these lifelines. Targeting energy infrastructure also raises the stakes diplomatically. It draws in more international attention, as countries that might otherwise stay neutral are now directly affected by the economic impact. This increases pressure on global powers to respond, mediate, or take sides, which can further complicate an already tense situation. What started as a tense situation between a few key players is now showing clear signs of spreading across the wider region, pulling in multiple countries and increasing the overall risk level. Iran's posture suggests that any further escalation will not remain limited to a single front. Instead, it has the potential to extend into neighboring areas where allied groups, strategic bases, and critical routes are already in place. This transforms the situation from a direct confrontation into a network-based conflict, where multiple points can ignite at once. One of the most important elements here is the presence of Iran-aligned groups across different parts of the Middle East. These groups operate in countries like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, and they can act as force multipliers without Iran needing to engage directly on every front. If activated, they could target military installations, supply routes, or strategic locations, creating pressure from multiple directions at the same time. This kind of multi-front tension makes it extremely difficult to control or contain the situation. At the same time, U.S. military bases and personnel are spread across the region, which adds another layer of complexity. Any expansion of the conflict increases the risk of these bases becoming indirect or direct targets, even if they are not the primary focus. This forces the United States to remain actively involved in monitoring, defense, and rapid response, which can quickly escalate the situation further depending on how events unfold. Regional powers are also closely watching and adjusting their positions. Countries in the Gulf, for example, have strong economic ties to global energy markets and cannot afford prolonged instability. At the same time, they must balance their relationships with both the United States and neighboring countries, making their responses cautious but highly strategic. Any shift in their stance, whether diplomatic, economic, or military, can influence the direction of the conflict. Another key factor is geography. The Middle East contains some of the world's most critical transit routes, pipelines, and trade corridors. As tensions spread, these areas become increasingly sensitive, and even minor incidents can have amplified consequences. The broader the conflict stretches, the more difficult it becomes to isolate and manage, as multiple flashpoints begin to interact with each other in unpredictable ways. The shift to a high-alert posture by United States military forces signals that the situation is being treated as more than just a distant regional conflict. When alert levels increase, it typically involves a wide range of immediate actions happening behind the scenes: enhanced surveillance, rapid deployment readiness, and the activation of defensive systems across key bases. This means troops are not only prepared for defense, but are also positioned to respond quickly if the situation escalates further. Across the Middle East, U.S. military installations are strategically located to monitor and react to potential threats. As tensions rise, these bases strengthen perimeter security, deploy missile defense systems, and increase aerial patrols to track any unusual activity. Warships in nearby waters may also shift positions to provide better coverage and faster response capability, especially in sensitive areas where movement and timing can make a critical difference. Another major component of this high alert status is intelligence gathering. The U.S. relies heavily on satellite monitoring, reconnaissance aircraft, and real-time data analysis to stay ahead of any developments. This allows decision-makers to assess risks quickly and adjust strategies accordingly. In a fast-moving situation, having accurate and immediate information becomes one of the most powerful tools in preventing surprises or minimizing damage. Coordination with allies is also intensified during such periods. Countries aligned with the United States in the region often share intelligence, conduct joint exercises, and align their defensive measures to ensure a unified response if needed. This level of coordination not only strengthens defense, but also acts as a deterrent, signaling that any aggressive move could trigger a broader, collective reaction. At the same time, being on high alert doesn't automatically mean direct involvement is imminent. It reflects preparedness and caution, where multiple scenarios are being considered simultaneously. Military planners evaluate possible outcomes, from limited skirmishes to larger confrontations, ensuring that forces are ready to adapt to whatever direction the situation takes. The overall trajectory of events is increasingly pointing toward a situation where escalation becomes harder to control with each passing move. When both sides continue to respond with force, the margin for error becomes extremely small. Even a minor miscalculation, a misinterpreted signal, a delayed response, or an unintended strike can trigger a chain reaction that neither side initially planned for. This is how conflicts that start as limited engagements often grow into something far more extensive. One of the biggest risks in this kind of environment is the absence of clear de-escalation pathways. When communication breaks down or trust is already low, it becomes difficult for either side to step back without appearing weak. This creates a cycle where each action demands a stronger response, gradually raising the intensity level. Over time, this pattern can push decision-makers into positions where their options become more limited and more aggressive. Another factor adding to the danger is the number of actors involved, directly or indirectly. Beyond Iran and Israel, the involvement of the United States introduces a global dimension. Each of these players has its own strategic goals, alliances, and red lines, which increases the complexity of the situation. When multiple powerful nations are engaged, even indirectly, the risk of the conflict expanding beyond its original scope becomes significantly higher. There's also the issue of speed. Modern military capabilities allow for rapid responses, whether through missiles, drones, or cyber operations. This reduces the time available for careful decision-making and increases the chances of reactive choices rather than calculated ones. In such conditions, decisions are often made under pressure, with incomplete information, which can further increase unpredictability. At the same time, public pressure and political expectations can influence how leaders respond. Governments may feel compelled to act decisively to maintain credibility, both domestically and internationally. This can limit their willingness to pause or negotiate, even when the risks are clearly rising. The combination of fast-moving events, multiple actors, and high expectations creates an environment where escalation is not just possible, but increasingly likely as tensions continue to build.